So I initially didn't plan on doing a review for this movie at all. It was a limited release film to start, and to be honest, I'd already gotten so many raving reviews I didn't think the voice of a guy with 22 subscribers was necessary for you to know you should watch the movie. Spoiler alert, I like the movie. But recently I saw a random edit of one of the main characters and figured that was more than enough reason to spend 8 hours watching, taking notes on the movie, and writing the script that I'm reading now. But before we get started, this is going to be a spoiler review. The movie's been out for 6 months, if you saw the early release anyway. As well as this movie needs to be experienced full blind, even a spoiler-free review could kind of ruin the experience for you, to be entirely honest. I don't really know how to explain that, just trust me. With that in mind, this review's not going to do much explaining. I'm going to review stuff that you should already know, because I'm assuming you've seen the movie. Real quick, I'd like to take a minute or two to go over the opening laundromat scene, because oh my god, it's perfect. Everything Everywhere All at Once follows the lives of our Wang family. Our protagonist Evelyn, her loving husband Waymond, and their daughter Joy. We open with a really bright clip about the family that just makes you happy. Jem's just watching a movie and having a good time. But that feeling is ripped away pretty quickly as we rather quickly descend into the madness that Evelyn perceives her life to be. The reason I say perceives her life to be is because it really isn't as bad as she thinks it is. She has an incredibly negative mindset, which is something that we'll come to learn at the end of this movie. And she's completely neglectful of her daughter and husband. Both of them has a simple yet short concern that they wish to address. Yes, I'm aware one of the simple concerns is a divorce paper, but it's on 2 pages. At the very least, we're gonna say it's short. But we see Evelyn push away her own family for taxes, laundry, customers. It appears as if she surrounds herself with work just to be able to say that she was busy through it all. Waymond is incredibly positive about the same things that upsets Evelyn the entire time. We see he has a much closer bond with the customers and cares much more deeply about their laundry as well. He moves the laundry into their own house because he thought it'd be more comfortable there. This is an incredibly important scene that sets up a lot of the rest of the movie as well. Character bonds, the general humor, as well as the directing style. Something brilliant about this scene is the music. Composed by Sun Lux, who I've actually never heard about before, is incredibly phenomenal. The first 2 tracks are adequately titled Very Busy and Very, Very Busy. They perfectly encapsulate the feeling of being hectic and stressful, yet energetic and upbeat. In fact, all the music in this movie perfectly captures whatever scene it's portraying. Especially the fight scenes and heart-to-heart moments. The use of the string instruments for the main sections of many of these tracks are brilliant. I don't plan on going over the rest of this film in order because it's hard to review the movie in that form. I'm a critic, not an analyst, but I'd like to take a few seconds to talk about the highlights. Janitor's closet, verse jumping, somehow the second time this year I've seen an Asian woman kill a security guard with a dildo. Vagina joke, bagel, suffering, main character dies. Bagel 2, rock. Bagel. LGBT community support. Okay, we are up to speed. One more time before we get into the fat of this review, I'd like to take a quick second to talk about some of the general things in this movie that don't really have a spot in the rest of this review. Firstly, it is really, really funny. I mean, even the jokes that honestly wouldn't land for me in other pieces of media are so funny here. Especially a joke about a butt plug that becomes a joke about 2 butt plugs. It's surprisingly humorous. There's one throwaway line where Alvin Waymond says peeing on yourself is always a good jumping pad, and I just think it's hilarious to hear him say that while getting arrested. And a line where he says he can't give himself paper cuts because it never happens on purpose. There is one joke I feel that overstays its welcome, but we'll get to that later in the review. Slingshotting, one of the core concepts of this movie, is honestly such a cool concept. I really love how it's both explained and visualized. We see it visualized on a device and it's quite literally a slingshot from one universe to the next. And we see Evelyn blast the universes on her second verse jump where she gets her kung fu skills. But the first time we really see her verse jump is when she goes into the closet, and it's such a cool shot that perfectly shows the audience exactly how Evelyn is experiencing the flow of time between these 2 realities. This also ties in closely with the editing, which is done really well. Apparently this team was on average 5 people, which round of applause for these guys because they did a really bang up job with it. Scenes like where you see Jobu's arsenal and even the subtle dust effects are done really well and just bring so much life into the movie. There's one scene early in the movie where the elevator dings match up to where we see Evelyn going through her past experiences, and honestly, until I was writing this review, I didn't even realize that this was still exposition for the movie. It's just so engrossing to watch and it's done so well. It's perfect. Jobu's outfits are also incredibly cool. The design team does a really good job with these. They're all over the top and I love it. Especially because even more of her tame outfits, like her golfer outfit, still get as much makeup and love and care put in them, and it looks really nice. Alright, on to the more serious parts of this review. There's one shot in this scene that I especially like that attests pretty well to the overall cinematography of this movie, and it's really simple. They literally move the fucking camera a half inch to the right. Literally, once again, going back to the opening laundromat scene, we see them subtly move the camera to the right, just to put Waymond into frame. And it is so good. This shot looks so clean for no reason. There are much more interesting shots in the movie, don't get me wrong, but I think this really kind of sets the tone of where the direction is going. They get really creative with this camera a lot of the time. One specific fight scene involving a fanny pack is incredibly well choreographed. Most of the fights in this movie are kung fu and mixed martial arts, but it never disappoints because none of the fights overstay the welcome or reuse ideas from previous battles. And these fight scenes are brutal. They do not hold back on impacts. In some cases, they even show them twice, especially during a particularly cruel interaction with Alpha Wayman. They also get incredibly creative with the cameras during the fight scenes, especially in the first fight scene. Not to say they used up all their energy on it, but there's one scene that they do that I don't really ever feel they get the energy back from. Perhaps one of my favorite things that they do in this movie is dynamically change the aspect ratio of the film. During the first fight scene, we see the aspect ratio go from widescreen to your standard cinematic 21:9, and that moment is so engrossing. You may not even realize it happened, but it's actually something they do quite frequently throughout the film that I'm not even sure I noticed the first time I watched the movie. In fact, during a fight scene where Evelyn fights the Alphaverse, it happens multiple times constantly throughout the fight, but you're so accustomed to it you probably didn't even notice it, and it doesn't even look choppy or staggering. On to the pacing of this movie, it's really good. I remember thinking to myself once in the theater, wait, how long have I been here? Because I got so engrossed with this film, I didn't even want it to end. It probably sounds like, how long have I been here? Like I didn't want to be there anymore. But I genuinely only realized I was still in the theater because the movie made me laugh so hard that I snapped back to reality. One slight issue, that if it even qualifies to be called that, is that the movie is split up into 3 chapters, not acts, chapters. Of course, it still does have the 3-act structure. That's not just how the movie distinguishes itself to the audience. This isn't a problem, nor is it a new concept, but the chapters are split up rather odd. The chapters are as follows: Everything, Everywhere, and All at Once. Everything lasts 1 hour and 28 minutes. Everywhere lasts 42 minutes. And All at Once is a mere 3 minutes. 9 if you count the 6 minutes of credits. Now, that isn't terrible, but it caused me to be almost shocked when the movie ended when it did. I was surprised it seemed so early into the last chapter that I wasn't ready to say goodbye to the film, which honestly made leaving the film feel a little bit better. I didn't really want to see the movie end, but I was happy with how it did. I know it's somewhat unorthodox to leave the character review section to the end, but it directly coincides with the film's themes and tones, so I kinda had to review them at the same part. The themes and tones being family and the meaning of life, or alternatively, the lack thereof. About 30 minutes into our film, we learn that Joy actually turns out to be our main antagonist, which unfortunately didn't hit that hard for me, but I'm not really sure that's something I'm really able to complain about, especially because they didn't exactly hide it in the trailer, but it kinda just was unsurprising and a little underwhelming. But once again, not a problem. When I was in theaters, I still gave it the good old double thumbs up and just kind of went about it. And honestly, it's not surprising that she turns out to be our main antagonist, because for the first 8 minutes of the movie, it's just pure, unadulterated child neglect. And it's surprising Evelyn would even treat her daughter like that, because she doesn't even play League of Legends. We come to learn that Joy turns into Jobu after Evelyn pushes her daughter too far, which is something I'm sure a lot of young Asian women can relate to, especially being children of first-generation immigrants. Being pushed too far, I mean, not the interdimensional mind trauma, just mostly generational trauma. We even see how Evelyn destroys and dissolves her relationship with Wayman, even going so far to say that her life without Wayman would have been beautiful, right to his face. It's heartbreaking. Evelyn is constantly putting herself first, and makes the world around her even worse for it, as Joy becomes Jobu and tries to kill her, or not so much, we'll touch on that later, and Wayman wishes to become part of the 50%. It sucks even more when we see her falling for Alpha Wayman and his typical action movie hero masculine traits, things that wouldn't really be useful or normal in a marriage. The theme of family is deep into this movie's core, even coming to the end of the film when Evelyn says to the grandfather that she won't do to Joy what he did to Evelyn. The grandfather, being named Gong Gong, isn't a major player in the film as the other 3, but his presence is still very important. It causes strain when Joy wishes to introduce her girlfriend to Gong Gong but forgets the word, and when Evelyn takes over to say it for her, she simply says a very good friend, and we can see Joy's reaction well, she's not too excited about it. Side note, during the course of this movie, our main hero actually goes from homophobic to ally, and that gets the HiKeiLoKei seal of approval. Aside from this family, what's also very important to this film is its almost morbid views on life. It's easy to say that this movie wants to leave you with the feeling that life is precious, but I think the alternate thought process that is a little depressing but somewhat fun to think about is that life may not mean anything. See, Jobu didn't do what she does because she's a rebellious teenager who likes to wear all black sometimes. She does what she does because she experiences a constant barrage of moments, minutes, seconds, emotions from the infinite lives she lives. She simply does not want to experience it alone. She brings her mom along seemingly because she wants to punish a version of her mother, because Jobu's original mother gave her the mind goblin. Eventually, Evelyn ends up with the belief that, granted for 15 minutes, nothing matters, and it leads to one of the funniest and maybe saddest scenes of the entire movie, the rock scene. Evelyn begins to come to the realization that nothing matters, so why try? Why bother living with the consequences when she can simply hop to the next one, a universe away? It really is difficult to watch our main character fall apart like this. And watching Waymond and Jobu's reactions as Evelyn signs the divorce paper and begins to destroy the laundromat, it really is just heartbreaking. But the reason I feel like the scene's pertinence is so intense that it might be a takeaway from the film is because our character believes it, so why shouldn't we? It really is just something more thought-provoking than anything else. Personally, I just like that the movie was willing to focus on a doomer outlook like this, but for all intents and purposes, this is just a thought experiment. I don't really think the movie wants you to believe that life doesn't matter at all. The end sequence does a fantastic job at turning around and providing a contrast to what everything we just saw was. In Evelyn's fight to save Jobu, we see everything take a much more positive turn, seeing Evelyn not fight to save Jobu, but to save Joy. And we even see Joy wish to save herself after she steps into the bagel and reaches her hand out. The final interaction between the two in the laundryverse, for lack of a better name, I really don't know what to call it, is so beautiful. I love the hand shot and personal feel that the angle gets. It's like we, the audience, are physically there watching this unfold. The shaky camera really provides to it, to be honest with you. I typically hate shaky cam, but I feel in this instance it's necessary and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's literally there for like 10 seconds. It really is incredibly heartwarming to watch these two find their way to live together again, especially knowing that they're not really alone in this universe. The movie ends with a shot of Evelyn seeing and hearing all these universes at the same time and accepting it. So I've spout pretty much nothing but praise about this film. Is there anything I didn't like? Well, naturally yes. There's a universe where Evelyn and the tax collector are a couple and have hot dog finger sex. You know, that's the second time I've said hot dog finger sex today. Weird. Anyway, my point is, plotlines like this I felt somewhat overstayed their welcome. I found them funny, and they definitely earned some points in my book for having a scene where they actually showed what caused the hot dog fingers. But when the movie is already 139 minutes, that's 2 hours and 19 minutes for you math fans, I don't actually really think it was necessary to leave bits like this in. The slingshotting, although I really love it, it doesn't really make sense sometimes. Like, they do explain it, that the weirder the something is, the more powerful you get, which I understand. It sounds like a basic video game mechanic, to be honest with you. But when it begins to not make sense is when you actively show us how Evelyn gets some of her powers. I don't get how snorting a fly leads to having the world's most powerful pinkies. I think it's a good turn off your brain moment. Like, I think the suspension of disbelief is strong enough here to make me not question this and for it to be a total non-issue. But upon the second watch, it was a question I asked myself. Lastly, the bond between Evelyn and Waymond kinda got repaired within like the last 30 minutes of the movie, and the bond repaired really within like a 10-minute window of that. It's like 10 straight minutes of Waymond and Evelyn's bond being fixed. But the scene is done so beautifully. Watching all these different Waymonds and Evelyns interact, it really is perfect. Especially because Evelyn finally starts to realize that Waymond has been cleaning up after her messes this entire time, not making them worse. But I do still kinda wish that we saw them slowly more falling in love, rather than seemingly after she stabs Waymond, she just decides to love him again. Overall, this movie quickly became one of my all-time favorites. Actually, maybe my all-time favorite. The previous spot being held by Into the Spider-Verse, which is also a multiverse movie, come to think of it. But I'd definitely give Everything Everywhere All at Once a 10 out of 10. Easiest 10 out of 10 of my life. I actually give it a 9.5 after watching it the first time, but upon watching it again, I loved it even more. Please buy all of the copies of this movie that you can afford to, and then watch every copy you own twice daily. Let me know your guys' thoughts of this movie in the comments. Shamelessly, I'm saying this because I'm begging for your engagement. I'm poor and the algorithm hates me. But no, all jokes aside, I genuinely would like to hear about your opinions on this movie. I've heard nothing but praise about it, and the points I mentioned are pretty much the only things I really thought were worth mentioning, so I'd like to hear some other opinions. And if you have a movie that you want me to review, let me know. Honestly, I'm still on summer break, so I have plenty of time to do this. Overall, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, leave a like, and if you like the video more, then subscribe. But thanks for watching. I need an outro. Oh no, Craig!